So actually, we're a venture fund, as she explained. We're now investing out of our third fund. It's a $200 million fund. Prior to this, our previous fund was about 150 million. And we got exposed to the food industry actually through Rebel. And I know you heard from Sagar earlier today, and I'll talk a little bit about that and what we learned about food through that journey as well. But actually, I thought I'd take a step back in general and just explain a little bit about what, as a fund, we look for in businesses. Because I'd imagine many of you, or some of you at least, might be thinking about funding at some point, or might already have funding, might be looking at scaling that up. So I thought maybe we'll just chat a little bit about what that is. For us, as a fund, what we look at is actually building tech-enabled businesses. And what I mean by that is, when I started out in 2005, we actually came to India with the perspective of saying, let's replicate a lot of businesses that existed in the West. And these were primarily platform businesses, where technology was the sole advantage that someone had. And we really didn't want to get involved in making or building anything. We didn't want to touch the product. We wanted to be distribution businesses. And I think over the course of, I would say really from 2012 on, we started to appreciate the fact that because of the fragmentation that exists in India, there's actually a phenomenal opportunity to actually leverage technology either in the production of a product, the distribution of a product, or the acquisition of customers. If you think about technology in one of these three areas and think about the role it can play, I think you actually get into a world where you're saying, I'm comfortable actually building the product. So that's how we ended up in businesses like Furlenco, where we actually manufacture furniture and rent it out, or as we talked about earlier, Rebel. So for us, it's really about building, not betting. In our fund, we are early investors in businesses. We go in usually even at a PowerPoint stage. So we have a small portfolio. We get deeply involved in the businesses. And what I mean by that is our success is tied directly to the success of the companies we invest in. For a fund that invests at the early stage, as we do, we only have 8 companies in our fund. So that's not distributing our risk very tremendously. And so if we're going to do that, then that means we're going to have to be deeply involved in our companies. And we do this all in businesses where we do believe that data and technology will be the differentiator. Now, it's interesting, again, if I go back to 2005, that was our sole premise. As time has evolved, we've said that data and technology is one pillar, the other is really brands. And as I go, I'll talk a little bit more about what brands do and how we see that playing out. Now, the reason we believe that tech is important, and it's driven out of the fact that the tagline for India should almost be fragmented. Because in general, we see fragmentation across the board, whether it's political parties, cuisines, cultures, languages, anything of the sort. And technology is finally the one platform that's unifying it. This is a picture of Google and the Indian Railways partnering to actually provide free internet connectivity at the railway platforms. So you get 24 Mbps free for an hour, and then after it drops to 1 Mbps. That's changing the dynamic, and I think that's bringing technology down to a broader base. This is just one example of it. But even with that, you take YouTube, for example, in India, they actually allow you to download content, which they didn't allow you to do in other markets. So all of this is actually shifting and opening up new opportunities to actually create brands in a country where we've actually not had deep brand penetration. And brands and tech are actually the future of where things are going. If you just look back in 2001, tech companies represented 15% of the total value of brand businesses out there. That's jumped to 33%. 5 out of the top 10 brand companies as ranked by Interbrand are now technology businesses. Some of those didn't exist 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And you take Apple, for example, it reinvented itself 25 years ago. So I think the impact that technology and brand bring together is actually phenomenal. And I think that's really what we're looking at, and that's what we're trying to understand as we invest in companies. And it's not just us. I think if you look at this, you're seeing a shift among the largest of the players in India to understand and appreciate the fact that the world is moving from oil to now data being the new oil. They went from 9% of their revenue 3 years ago being from the consumer side to 22%. And I came across an article this morning that said it was their consumer business that's now driven them even higher as the largest revenue company in India. So I think these shifts are being recognized across the board. And I think it's going to be an important part of every business going forward. And so when we think about these shifts, you also start to think about how to engage with consumers. And I think being conscious of the fact that traditional marketing methods aren't necessarily going to be the way to do it. Instagram, for example, is a phenomenal way to engage, a phenomenal way to understand your customers. The one to me that's really surprising is Royal Enfield. And Royal Enfield has built a phenomenal brand and a phenomenal following without a ton of spend on marketing. And they have great, deep engagement on Instagram. And I think that if you look at that, even when you compare it to some of the companies in the US that were born on the internet, whether it's Rent the Runway or Casper, you can see that Indian companies are really engaging in this world, and consumers are getting that direct engagement back. So I don't think it's feasible anymore to build a brand just by putting up a hoarding or putting up a TV ad and saying, get a celebrity, they will tell you what it is, and you don't have to listen to your customer. Your customers are going to engage much more directly and much more consistently with you, and you have to figure out how you're going to build that out. And I think that all of this engagement, all of this exposure is actually enabling new formats to kind of come about in parallel with other markets. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that it's fully successful yet, but what I am contending is that these types of models are coming about much faster because the exposure the consumers have through whether it's streaming content online, social networks, just the pure exchange of information is now giving birth to a cafe culture, which is actually driving the closure of some of the QSRs, for example, and shifting the format of how people need to think about it.